biggest piece of advice from me would to be not allowing yourself to be led by the technology, but be led by a clear need. Allow the technology that you're developing, that you think you've got, to answer the question that is asked by the need. It's really easy, to jump on a brand new piece of technology, whatever that might be, and think, oh, this is amazing. This is the answer to every problem there is. But it's probably not going to be answering any of the real problems. So you end up sort of shoehorning the technology around the problem.
Welcome to the H-Files, the new series of the Hands-On Business podcast, where we dive deep into the world of healthcare leadership and the unique challenges facing small to medium-sized healthcare businesses. I'm Hakeem Adebiyi, and after years of helping businesses grow in various industries, I'm excited to focus on the area that I know the best, healthcare, one of the most dynamic and impactful sectors in the world today. In this series, we're going to explore what it takes to lead and grow in healthcare, from navigating the complexities of regulation and innovation to overcoming the everyday hurdles of building a sustainable business in this fast-paced environment. Each episode will feature real-world insights, expert interviews, and actionable strategies that can help you push your healthcare business forward. So whether you're a leader in the space or an entrepreneur ready to break into it, the H-Files is here to give you the edge. So you've built the tech, the clinical data looks very promising. You've even had a few early wins in pilots or trials. But then when it comes to getting your diagnostic into widespread use, things stall. You hit the same barriers again and again and again. For example, reimbursement pathways that move at a snail's pace, hospitals interested but not actually committing, investors asking for traction, but not really giving you the cash to get there. Does that sound familiar? Because if it does, this week on the H-Files, I'm joined by Dave Taylor, technology entrepreneur with 30 years experience working in the Internet of Things, in complex web and app development. He's a CEO currently at Valid Diagnostics, where their mission is earlier detection and diagnosis of diseases. He's seen the good, he's seen the bad, and he's seen the commercially challenging. We talk honestly about why so many great diagnostics fail to gain traction. We're going to talk about how to build a compelling value case when the system is slow to change. And we're also going to start discussing early stage companies and what they can do right now to give themselves a better shot of success. So if you're working in diagnostics or healthcare innovation more broadly, this episode could save you time, funding headaches, and a lot of frustration. So let's get into it. Welcome, Dave. Glad that you could join me today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So to kick off, if we just we're going to go large and broad, and then we're then going to narrow in. So if there was one piece of advice over your experience in healthcare that you've been working in the last several years, what would be the one thing you could give as advice to say, if you want to make a big impact in your specific field in healthcare, you do this one thing?
Great question to start with. So I'm coming at this from a technology perspective. That's kind of where my background is, not a care pathway perspective. So I'd say the biggest piece of advice from me would to be not allowing yourself to be led by the technology, but be led by a clear need. So allow the technology that you're developing, that you think you've got, to answer the question that is asked by the need. It's really easy, to jump on a brand new piece of technology, whatever that might be, and think, oh, this is amazing. This is the answer to every problem there is. But it's probably not going to be answering any of the real problems. So you end up sort of shoehorning the technology around the problem, if that makes sense. So I think really you've got to take a step back, look at the need, and then from there on in, use the technology to answer the need.
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice. And how do you verify the need? Because there's lots of people who believe that they're answering a need, and then they launch the product and it doesn't really deliver because actually the need isn't as big as they thought it initially was. So how do you verify that before you start investing all your time and your money into the product?
Another great question. Lots of effort. It takes a lot of work. Yeah, well, I mean, seriously, you sort of, you generally you fall into these things because you've been involved in something somewhere. You've seen stuff happening. You've talked to people, whoever they might be. They could be patients. They could be medics. There could be a conversation around something. Let's say, and you think that's really interesting. There's something going on there. There must be a better way of doing something, a better way of answering that problem. So you start to kind of you start to look into it, and you start to kind of peel some layers back. You talk to more people, you have more conversations, and eventually you start to sort of form a view around that particular problem. And that's where you then got to start putting in the hard work, because you then got to do lots and lots of deep dive background research and start to really investigate, what that problem is, and then how you could potentially help solve that problem, or make the problem, less of a problem.
Okay, no, and I think that's the key, isn't it? It's about that research and making sure you don't move forward till you've really bottomed out what that need is and how you can really make a significant difference in that. Absolutely. Whatever field that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So now just tell me a bit more about what you do at Valid Diagnostics, because as I said in the intro, and as you said, you come from a tech perspective originally in your journey. So how do you go from tech to healthcare and then cancer detection and diagnostics?
Well, how long have we got? That's quite a long story. The short version. So my deep background is in web tech. So I ended up starting the first web apps agency in Wales back in 1994. So that's going back a long time. Over the years, it did lots and lots and lots of work in that space. Ended up getting into software. Ended up developing a software company which created an app and cloud-based platform to capture results on a lateral flow test. So the typical kind of test you might be using during COVID to test yourself for lateral flow. I capture an image of that result, upload that result via an app and cloud-based system into the platform, use AI and machine learning to quantify the result of that test, and then send it back downstream to the user at the app end, and also the feed downstream the other way into patient records and care record systems. So through that, we became much more aware of, or I became much more aware of lateral flow. Before that, I didn't really understand what lateral flow was. And suddenly we thought, hey, this is really interesting, lateral flow. We met lots of really interesting people in the lateral flow business, people who were developing lateral flow tests for a variety of different diseases. And we created a whole lot of relationships. And then through those relationships, they just sort of kind of developed. We met people. We talked about ideas. Again, going back to my previous answer, we talked about ideas and problems and needs. And we thought, hey, there's a way to use lateral flow technology to create a better solution to testing for disease profiles in humans and in animals. So that's why we set up Valid Diagnostics, to bring together all of that expertise and to start creating easy to use, cheaper, more accurate test methods for certain human diseases. One of those people that we met was a guy called Professor Lewis Muir, who leads a research team at Aberystwyth University. And he was deeply involved in something called metabolomics research. So he was investigating the discovery of biomarkers for disease in carrier fluids which come from the human body. So, urine, blood, sputum, and so on. And he had the early beginnings of a range of what we call a biomarker fingerprint for a number of diseases. So we thought, this is great. This is a really good starting point. One of the other people involved in that work, a chap called Dr. David Rook, was helping with that research and supporting that financially. And he was an expert in another part of the process of developing lateral flow tests. So we came together, we talked about it at great length, and we thought this is a really good opportunity to change the way that we can test for some very serious diseases in humans. So that's how we came about setting up the company. So what we're doing, in a nutshell, is we're taking the biomarker fingerprints, which have been discovered at Aberystwyth University by Lewis's team, and then we're going through the development process to create lateral flow tests, which can then kind of circle back and discover those biomarkers in urine samples. So we will have a suite of lateral flow tests eventually, which we can use to check. So, for instance, a urine sample from yourself, we'll be able to check that urine sample, and we will know if you've got prostate cancer biomarkers in your urine. Or we can check someone else's urine sample, and we will be able to tell if they have got the biomarkers for lung cancer in their urine. But so that's what we're doing. We're in the middle of that whole cycle. We're in the development cycle. The expectation is we'll have some of the tests prototyped and internally verified towards the end of this year. And then we'll be off into the market sometime in 2026.
Oh, excellent. So yeah, I mean, that's really quite revolutionary stuff, isn't it? Because it means that you're not having to have invasive diagnostics. You can then literally just take, as you said, a bodily fluid, and you can detect a variety of different cancers.
Yeah.
Because I've had the old prostate exam, etc., which is rather unpleasant. Let's put it that way. So if someone could just take a sample of my urine and say, yeah, you've got it or you haven't, then that
Yeah.
would be a bit of a game changer. So
Right.
interesting because because the challenge always with any new thing, because in my mind, is like NHS new products, they don't really play nicely together. So what's some of the challenges that you would say that you've specifically seen across that in terms of trying to go from where you are, and obviously you're talking about 2026, but what the challenges you envisage going from where you are to actually commercially being able to do something with the product, or
Well,
a suite of products actually.
yeah, well, you're right. I mean, it's important to be aware that we're talking about one test for one disease profile here. It's not a test that tests for 4 or 5 different diseases. That would I mean, nice to have, but that's kind of way over the horizon somewhere.
Yeah.
In the middle distance or in the long distance. But you're right. I mean, it's quite interesting actually. To take a step back, you mentioned prostate cancer, so I'll bear in mind the question, the big question that you just asked, Hakeem. But the prostate cancer is a really good example. There is an existing pathway for prostate cancer testing in the UK and pretty much everywhere else internationally. Follows more or less the same kind of pathway, which generally starts with a PSA test, which is a blood test, which you will have had if you've been through this particular pathway. So you know what I'm talking about. Now, the PSA test is not actually a test for prostate cancer per se. It tests for the level of prostate-specific antigen in your blood. So it's a blood test. If you have a raised level of PSA, you may have a problem with your prostate. Now, that problem may then turn out to be prostate cancer, or it may turn out to be something benign like BPH. You can't tell from that PSA test. It's a very kind of, it's a very open, test, which just gives you a bit of a hint that there might be something going on there. So let's say you then have that test, you've got a raised level of PSA, you then go on and you have an internal examination, most likely by a specialist, to see if they can feel if your prostate is enlarged and if they think there's a problem there. If they think there's a problem, you'll probably get referred for an MRI scan where they can kind of, look at the prostate in detail, see if they can see any issues, or see if they can interpret that there are any issues. And again, it's a bit of a can, maybe interpret something. And then if they think there's a problem there, you will then, in all likelihood, get sent for a prostate biopsy, which is a deeply unpleasant process. Involves the use of a long needle to extract some tissue from the interior of the prostate, and that then goes off for lab analysis. And it's only when you get to that kind of level that you start to get some definitive results as to whether or not you have prostate cancer. So it's a bit of a long, drawn out process. It's time consuming. It's not very pleasant for the patient. It's expensive. It costs an awful lot of money because there's a lot of stages involved, a lot of people involved. But it's the established process. So people trust the end-to-end process there, even though the sort of the percentage capture rate isn't particularly great. So it's a really good question because it's very difficult to shift the acceptance of a process like that to something completely new. There are quite a few other people developing prostate tests in the background, mostly blood-based, all lab tests. So they're all a bit invasive because you've got to take blood.
Mm-hmm.
All expensive and all very time-consuming because they're lab-based blood tests. But what's different about ours is that it's really easy to do, or it will be really easy to do. It's going to be very inexpensive, and you can pretty much do it anywhere. Using a urine sample, no blood involved, so it's invasive. So the challenge is, yes, to try and get that accepted into the system. How do you do that? You've got to prove the efficacy. So you've got to get sufficient sort of examples of the test being used in parallel with the existing regime in order to prove that it works and it's at least as effective, if not more effective than the current regime. If you've got enough data to prove the efficacy, you've got to think about regulatory. So you've got to then go through the regulatory process, which means gathering more data, having small-scale trials in real-life situations, and then you've got to persuade the buyers in the healthcare pathway to actually buy into the product and start to actually add it into their pathway. So, well, it's a great idea and it's going to work really well, and it will work. It does work really well. It will take us some time to jump through all those hurdles. And I think arguably the biggest hurdle is that adoption into the care pathway at the last stage of that, particularly with something like the NHS, which is a huge organisation and moves very slowly. So I think from our perspective, we're thinking about all of that, and we have a strategy to work in a particular way to try and get through that process. And one of the ways that we're going to try and do that, and we're all working with a couple of smaller teams at a local level in hospitals to use the test in parallel with their existing processes and compare it and contrast and gather that data. And then we'll try and kind of build from the ground up, as it were, rather than it being a sort of top-down, you've got to use this test. So there's no straight answer to it, unfortunately. It's a bit one of those where you've got to sort of try and navigate your way through it, and just find the opportunities to get the evidence to then be able to put it in front of the right people to say, hey, this worked really well. Let's get this approved and let's get this adopted.
And then how do you balance that clinical need, which is what you've been talking about, and then comparing it with what's currently out there? You balance that with a commercial viability, i.e. the pricing, and then also the costing that it costs you just to bring that to the market, because obviously as you're going through that process, that's all cash based. So how do you balance those things up?
Well, again, another question where there's no straight answer, Hakeem. We're not in the market yet, so we haven't found the answer to that question. And I think it's got a lot to do with the first answer I gave when we started chatting a few minutes ago. If you're led by a clear need and you allow the technology to provide the answer to the need, then it's up to you then to find a way to make it commercially viable. So if you can prove that the need is there, you can prove that you have something which fulfills that need and provides a service or a function which is better than the existing process. I think you're off to a good start then, and it's then all about finding the commercial viability. It's again, it's back to doing your research. You've got to spend a bit of time looking at the current cost for whatever it is you're trying to replace or improve. See if you can see if it can be done at a lower cost, or what you're doing going to provide better value for money. First of all, because it's going to be very difficult to replace the current process, even if it's as good as or a bit better than the current process, if it's going to cost more, because that's just not really helping. If it's going to cost the system more money, then it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a very difficult sell for you. So I think you've got to prove that there is a health economics benefit further downstream. But of course, it's not always about saving money. Although that is a key thing. So that health economics is really important. Cost benefit analysis. You've got to underpin that by the proof that it will actually improve people's lives and it will improve the way that a particular process is undertaken. For us, it's to work out what our product cost will be at the point of delivery. It's actually relatively straightforward because we've got a known quantity. We're building a lateral flow test. We can price that up fairly. We can look at different methods of production, different locations, different materials, different quantities. So we can quite easily arrive at a cost of goods, and then we can work out then backwards from that how that fits into the current process and how that wraps up in the time that it would take to implement something, which is all part of that cost benefit analysis. Again, as I said, no straightforward answer. It's a little bit nuanced, I guess, is the answer.
No, it is. But I mean, as you said there, it's not. I mean, obviously, the health economics in the NHS are so critical these days. But I was even listening to the radio this morning, and they were talking about the NHS having the lowest rate of satisfaction since records began 40 years ago. And one of those issues is because of the time it takes to do anything. The process you just outlined for normal prostate cancer at the moment takes weeks, if not months, to get to a diagnosis. If you can do that much more quickly, then it might not be, even if it wasn't cheaper, but it sounds like it would be less expensive, then actually the cost to the NHS is all that time of the clinicians doing all those tests and checking those tests. And then you go to the GP, then you have to go to the hospital, as opposed to doing a simple test whereby, okay, you've either got it or you haven't. That takes out a massive amount of workload from the NHS, which then means they're freed up to do lots of other things. So I think that's the key. I think sometimes people obsess about, if I bring a product out, it has to be less expensive, i.e. pound, shilling and pence, than the competitor or the comparator, when actually, no, it needs to be looking at the flow. And actually what I've noticed is when you're in places like the US, they're much better at understanding that because everything is costed. So they cost the time of a nurse, they cost the time of a bed, they cost the time of cost the price of an MRI. So if you can take all those things out, it's very easy to say, well, economically, it's not cheaper than that particular process you're talking about. But when you add all the things in, it's a fraction of the cost.
Well, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But ironically, it's really difficult to get the authorities, as it were,
Yes.
to sort of take that into consideration and look at it holistically in that way. And actually, something that's also really important, which people don't think about, is the cost to the patients, to you and I. Because that process that we've described for prostate cancer, you start to worry about it, from day one. So that affects you mentally. That affects your productivity on your day-to-day working life, because you're going to spend a lot of your time, worried about the about this, this potential diagnosis that you may or may not get, and that takes an awfully long time to get to. So you spend all of that time being less productive. You're losing lots of time at work, going for consultations and tests and so on. It's costing family time because you're not focusing on your family and so there's a raft of other things sort of bubbling behind the surface there, which also need to be thought about. But again, the faster you get to an accurate diagnosis, the less of that causes you that sort of worry and that grief. So it's a double header really. It's quite so important.
No, it's an interesting one because I mean, as Valid Diagnostics is about early detection, isn't it? And early detection, especially in cancer, is critical because the further you go down the line, the harder it is to treat. And I think, even if I think about myself, the only reason I went to get the prostate cancer test was because my sister started harassing me and saying, Hakeem, at that age, and black men have a higher percentage chance of getting it. So, and even then I was thinking, yeah, I've heard about those tests. I don't really find it. It's quite invasive. I don't really want to go. If it was a simple lateral flow test, I'd have just gone the next day. I'd have probably done it years ago. Yeah. You wouldn't worry about it. So even just in terms of identifying and people going to get the test, if they know it's a simple urine test, you're going to have flocks of people going. When people know it's invasive, people I'll leave it till as long as I possibly can, or until I've got an issue actually, and then I'll go and check it. So I think there's lots to be said for that early detection, actually having something that, as you said, the cost to the person. It also includes how unpleasant do I think it is, which then determines whether or not I'm actually going to go to the doctor to say, can I have a test? Because you're not actually called in for it.
Absolutely. And you're right, us blokes are notorious for not wanting to go to the doctor.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, go back to that point you just said there about earlier. That's key actually. That's really key. Typically, with prostate, we keep talking about prostate cancer, but prostate cancer is an important thing to talk about. Typically with prostate cancer, you don't tend to get called in for a test. There isn't a screening program. There isn't a sort of a draw to pull you in. You will go for a test if you think you need to get a test or someone's coaxed you into doing it, like your sister or your wife or whoever or whatever. Typically, you don't tend to do that until you're mid-50s or older, because typically you don't start to get problems. You don't become symptomatic with potential prostate problems until you reach that age. So it's quite late on, and inevitably what happens, of course, is you go to get tested, Obviously, some guys will be in the clear. They're great. They're fine. But the guys that then go on for the further testing, because it is relatively late in their life. I mean, not really late. I'm not saying, those guys are mid to late 50s are old, but you tend to find that the cancer has progressed more significantly by then. So it's a later stage cancer. So if you are tested and you are positive and you have got a problem, hey, fantastic. It's been found, we can intervene. We can do something about it. But the interventions are significantly more difficult because it's so much later on in the life cycle of the gestation of the cancer. Now, if the testing process is easy and cheap and accurate, you can do that much earlier in the life cycle of the whole process. So, for example, the test that we're developing, we've proven in the lab that we can take typically urine samples from guys in their early to mid 30s, and we can find the biomarkers in the urine from those younger guys which show the potential for prostate cancer. So we can introduce, an earlier testing regime, and you will see then if that guy has got the potential for developing prostate cancer, and you can do a number of things. You can intervene more early. That might just be lifestyle changes at that particular point in time. You can monitor more frequently from that earlier age, and that can all help to avoid developing, full-blown prostate cancer 30 years later when you get to your 20, 30 years later. And you write about black guys, there is an incidence of black guys having issues with prostate cancer at an earlier stage. So again, we can actually start testing at about 25, for those men who are more prone to developing prostate cancer, and spot the biomarkers and spot the indicators at that really early stage. So it will help those younger guys to think more seriously about how they intervene and how they can avoid developing fully blown prostate cancer later downstream.
And obviously, when you talk about early detection and specifically cancer, it's all about data, isn't it? Really.
Yes.
And you touched on it a bit about, obviously, you're collating data and you're working with some of those smaller units. So what advice would you give in terms of, right, well, you've got to gather data. How early should you start trying to gather it? And how do you get the right evidence? And the reason why I asked that is because I've worked with lots of companies who launch their products and they haven't really got much data, and then they start wondering why people aren't convinced by the fact that I, as the inventor, am saying, no, it's a great product, and there's a few people down the road who've used it and they think it's great as well. So how do you go down that pathway in terms of knowing what's the data you need and how early to get it?
Great, yeah, you're really asking the difficult questions today. But again, a really important question, Hakeem. And the data and the evidence is massively important for both the business case and for the adoption case. We're fundraising at the moment, for example. So we're trying to raise a seed round to help us move to the next phase in our development. We're a relatively small, a new company. We're still a startup essentially. We've been bootstrapping from day one. Rolling from Peter to pay Paul. So I'm having lots of conversations with investors about how we can get funding in to help us get the next phase. And everyone you speak to, they go, "This is a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer, Dave. It's going to be really easy." It's not. It's not easy to raise money. It's very difficult to raise cash. Because from from a business perspective, from an investor perspective, they want to see that your thing works before they give you any money. They want proof points, And the problem you've got as a startup in our sort of situation is you can't generate the evidence, and you said this yourself a minute ago, you can't generate the evidence without the investment and the cash to spend, because everything costs a lot more than you think it's going to cost. And that's just from the business perspective, from raising cash to build a business. And I've kind of already said, earlier that you need the evidence to get into the market, into the NHS, for example, with the insurance companies to persuade them and show them that the product really is worthwhile. So I suppose it's a bit back to that research thing, And the way I always phrase it is that you need to find the right people to make friends with. So as the startup, as the developer of a product, you've got to make lots of friends. You've got to spend a lot of time with those new friends, and you've got to give them lots of ideas to help them. You've got to talk to medics. You've got to talk to patients. Just sort of feed off what they say to you, and it kind of almost happens by accident sometimes. Often the result of that background research you do, and you work hard, and you make some luck, and you stumble across some useful people, and eventually you'll get those relationships in place, and you'll start to get access to some of the pathways to gathering that evidence that you need. So, for example, right back to the start where I was talking about the team that we're working with at Aberystwyth University, they just happened to be running, as part of the sort of background to their metabolomics research into prostate cancer biomarkers, they were running a program called OSCAR, which was an academic study, and they were gathering evidence by collecting urine samples from men from hospitals across. At the time we started to work on this, about a year ago, they had about 500 or 600 samples from men from a range of hospitals, urine samples, and we were able to use that 500 or 600 samples as a biobank to do the initial testing, to be certain that we could prove that we could find the biomarkers in the urine samples, and the biomarkers were the biomarkers that we needed to be able to diagnose prostate cancer. So that was a really good, early step, and a good, it was a good bit of luck. And it helped us to be able to get the proof points at a very early stage. Now that study is going on, and they've got ethics to collect up to 10,000 samples of urine from men. So we've got the basis there to, for ourselves to create a really good evidence base. And that was through all of those background conversations, making friends with the team at Aberystwyth, talking about this, throwing ideas about, and eventually kind of settling down to something that we thought would work. And we were able to, so in a lot of ways, we were very lucky. But again, as I said, you make your own luck by having all those conversations and doing all that background digging and background research.
Oh, so I'm going to carry on.
No, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so what keeps you going? Because founders, you come up with an innovative idea, you then obviously start bringing it to the market, or bringing it through the process to get it to market. You've got funding challenges, as you said, robbing Peter to pay Paul. What keeps you going? What keeps you motivated? Because, as you said, your plan is to launch, in about a year, 18 months' time?
Yeah.
So you've still got a lot of heavy lifting and process to go through to get to that point. And then when you get to that point, you're not going to be making money immediately. Then try to make the commercial. Yeah. So what is it that keeps you going in those dark nights when you're thinking, bloody hell, why did I start this process?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that one. I often look in the mirror and ask myself the same question: why am I doing this? Yeah. No, in all seriousness, you do question yourself, because it is very difficult. I think it's just a particular mindset. Some people are born to, do the same thing every day for the rest of their lives, and that's fine, because that's how they survive. That's how they get on. That's what they enjoy. That's how they improve. They just make themselves better and better and better at that one thing. Some people are born to, to grab hold of, some kind of life-changing idea and try and run with it, because they feel, inclined to want to make a difference. So I can't really, and that's just the way I operate. But you are driven to some extent by experiences. Everyone knows someone who's been touched by cancer of some sort. I think the stats are crazy across all the different cancers. I think it's ridiculous. It's something like 1 in 3 people at some point in their lives will get some form of cancer, and there's amazing work going on in cancer therapeutics to try and help people, get better or survive or last longer. But let's turn it on its head, and if we can diagnose it significantly earlier, or we can do more about it significantly earlier, you don't end up with that 1 in 3 people getting cancer, full-blown cancer, later on in their lives, and that can make a massive difference to people's lives. So I think there's a huge amount of of self sort of motivation involved in that, wanting to do the right thing, and to some extent wanting to put a positive dent in the universe. Maybe I think it might have been Steve Jobs from Apple said something about making a dent in the universe. Well, I think that's really important to go away and look back on your life and say, well, actually, personally, I did that thing, and it made a big difference to all those people. So it's difficult to pin down, what motivates you to do it, but there is just a burning kind of desire to want to do something good and put something back. I guess that's really it. It sounds a bit bonkers, a bit mad, but it is what it is. It's.
I don't think it does, actually. I think that especially in healthcare and medtech, then purpose-driven founders are generally the ones that are successful, because anyone who's got a commercial brain or technology brain can go and do something else. It doesn't have to be healthcare. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to bring it to market. There's less regulation, etc. So what I always advise people, and I always ask this question when I'm working with people, is, okay, so why do you want to do it? And there are some people who say, because I think I can make loads of money out of it. I say, go and do something else, because you may well make loads of money out of it, but it's going to be a very painful journey if that's the only reason. There's a much easier way to make money. Whereas, as you said, if you're trying to make a dent in the universe, if you're trying to make a change, so when you're on your deathbed, you can think, actually, I made a positive change to humanity, then to me, that's why people who really want to deliver change are in the healthcare business. So that's why I always ask that question, because it's always interesting. Because that gets to me, it always gives me the idea of whether someone's going to be successful or not. If they've actually got a purpose, that they will get there by hook or by crook. If it's just about cash, as soon as you hit that stalling point, it's like, oh, this is costing me a lot of money. Right, let me do something else. And you're like, oh, right. So you're not really that bothered about whether or not you change somebody's life, are you?
Yeah.
It's just about the pounds. So that, I think that's quite important, to have that vision and have that passion and that purpose when you're trying to go into healthcare, because it isn't easy. I think lots of people think it's going to be really easy. I've got a great product, everybody needs it. I'll just show it to people and everyone will use it. I can't think of any product, however great, even Viagra, which everyone always says, oh, Viagra. I said, well, Viagra was a blood pressure medicine. So
Yeah.
they developed that for donkey's years before they then made any money out of it. It's not.
Yeah.
If they just said we want to make money out of it, they'd have probably given up years before. So I think that's a really important point. So we're coming to the end.
Okay.
And it's been illuminating, actually, and it's been really interesting. And what I'm definitely going to do is I'm going to try and get you on, if you're amenable to it, maybe in 6 months' time, a year's time, just so we can now plot the journey to see how you're going. Because it's really interesting to get early founders on to hear about the challenges, the work that's going on, all the stuff you're doing, and then as you're getting closer and closer to the commercialization, and then when you commercialize it, that'd be a really nice arc for us to be able to chart that. I'd really appreciate that if you're open to that.
Absolutely. It'd be brilliant. I'd love to do that. Be really interested to come back and have the same conversation, but with a slightly different context.
Yeah, no, exactly. So if at this point, because we're going to close on this, if you had one message for medtech founders working in early cancer detection or just early diagnosis, what would that be?
One message, blimey, one piece of advice, maybe.
Yeah, one piece of advice.
Yeah, I guess the answer is kind of in the question, though. Whilst you're running a business, you're starting a business, it is a business. It needs to make some money to pay the bills, obviously. You need to repay the investors if you're lucky enough to get people to invest in you and support you. But I think that whole vision thing is the key thing. You've got to have that vision. Your business needs to be striving to achieve something worthwhile, whatever that is in medtech. And I think, it's back to that positive dent in the universe thing, you need to be striving to improve something, to have that positive impact, to improve lives, to improve well-being, the environment, whatever it is, that is your vision. You need to be really focused on that and keep that in mind. And I think the values that you bring to the table need to underpin that vision. The founders in the business, the first few hires, the first few key team members you bring into the business, need to align with those values to support that vision. Everyone needs to conduct themselves in the right way. Integrity, honesty. You can go on and on about all of that stuff, but that's really important. I think if you've got that vision and you've got the values that you're promoting within the business from within yourselves, then that's the thing. You just follow that. And if you've done all the other stuff, you found a need, and you've got a piece of technology or something which is going to help to improve or to answer that need or improve a process. That'll keep driving you forward. So in one line, how can I say in one line? If I'm qualified to offer this as a piece of advice, I'd say always stick to the values. Come what may, and that will help you to achieve the vision.
Yeah, no, I think that will stand you in good stead. And Dave Taylor from Valid Diagnostics, I've really appreciated the opportunity to talk about this, because there's lots of people who are in this stage who start to lose a bit of hope. So it's always good for people to know this is a normal process, and some of the things that you need to do, like you were talking about, obviously doing smaller scale studies and speaking to lots of people when you're in a small business is critical, because you never know. Because you said, I think your exact term, we've been lucky. It's amazing how lucky you get when you work hard and you speak to lots of people, because you come across opportunities that you wouldn't have if you just sit in your own little room or your own little lab, try to develop stuff and think, oh, I'll just do it on my own. You're going to have problems. You need to broaden out that framework and start speaking to people. So I've really appreciated this little insight into what you're doing. And as I said, I really want you to come on in the next 6 to 12 months when you feel that actually you made the next step so we can then start to chart that process. Because I think that would be really nice as on my podcast to be able to say, look, I spoke to Dave when he was in the early detection stage, but in the early phase of his journey. Then we go, he's just on the brink of launching. Then we're talking about 6 months after launch and how it's all gone, because then you've got a really nice pathway mapped out for some early innovators. Really appreciate you coming on, Dave.
Well, appreciate your time and talking to me. It's as you can imagine, as you can probably tell, I could talk all day about this stuff. So it's nice to speak to like-minded people as well. So that's good. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. So that was a fascinating podcast into the mind and the challenges of a startup healthcare business. I'm really confident that Dave will take that to a successful conclusion. I'm really looking forward to following up with Dave and seeing, in 6 months and a year's time, how that process has gone, because he's got a great product, he's got a great vision, the team has got the right values, and it's really now just about that, getting the data set and really pushing that product through the process to get it to the commercial market. So really looking forward to that. I'm hoping that was as inspiring to everyone listening and watching as it was to me. And we'll see you on the next episode. And don't forget to pick up the show notes over at thesalesaccelerationformula.com/podcast-show-notes. You'll also find an option to subscribe to our mailing list so that you can get notes for every single episode straight to your inbox. While you're at it, don't forget to tune in to next week's episode of my new 5 in 5 series, where I share 5 actionable takeaways in just 5 minutes from this episode, which will help you supercharge your business growth. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who might find it valuable. Most importantly, keep the feedback coming so we can keep improving and bringing you more of what you love. Thank you very much for tuning in. And remember, keep listening, keep growing, and keep thriving.